So that day, my father had already had multiple restraining orders against him from my mother. He knocked on the door and said, "Hey, I want to see the kids." And he barged his way into the door. My brother, who was 2.5, peeked his head out the doorway, witnessed something truly horrific. My mother and my father got into a big argument, and at some point it became physical to where he ended up choking her to death. From what my brother recounted to the police, he stripped her of her clothes, shoved her naked body in a closet for 2 weeks. As the days went by, people would come over to Patricia's house asking, "Where's Patricia?" And John would make up excuses. "She's out at the beach. She's out on vacation." Eventually, a social worker came by to do a wellness checkup and found my father on drugs, trying to kill himself in the bathtub. Unsuccessfully, the social worker found him, called 911, and they then found my mother's body and my brother and I. My brother was actually comprehensive enough to tell the police all the details of what happened, which has been very traumatizing throughout his life. My father went to jail for a few months, but he found a way to tear the genes that were supposedly unterrible, and he strung himself up through a vent and himself. So really, I think about it as if my father was probably coming off some hardcore drugs and he was coming off alcohol, but when he realized what he did, he was just in this sense of, what do I do? What do I do? Because he was making up excuses. He was trying to hide the fact that he murdered her. I think he was just trying to think of a plan, whether maybe it was to escape, to run away with both of us. I think ultimately in the end, he realized both of those ideas were not a good option. To end his life would have been much quicker and easier in a sense. I think he was probably in a little bit of a delirious state during those 2 weeks. So after the situation, my brother and I were put into temporary foster care. There was a few people who tried to foster Tyler, but he was a little out of hand. My family on my mother's side, they were all trying to debate if they wanted to take both of us in. So my mom's sister said, "I already have 3 kids of my own. I can take on 2 more." And so that's what ended up happening. We moved in to her house and she raised us up until 18 years old. And during that time, there was a lot of speculation going on with my mother's side of the family about how the court system failed my mother because there was already multiple restraining orders against my father. There was a long criminal history. There was a long substance history. The fact that all this happened because he was not detained. He wasn't kept away from my mom, and they didn't really do much of anything to protect her. He was known as an aggressive man. It truly is the court's fault for not being able to protect my mother. So my mother and my father were high school sweethearts. It looked like a normal, happy, healthy relationship, but my father had a lot of mentally, and I think he kept that hidden for as long as he could. But once the drugs and alcohol abuse really started to showcase his personality more, and once my mother had her children, she decided she didn't want to be a part of any of it. So I don't know for a fact if she ever confided in anybody, but I think she was in a little bit of denial. So growing up through our teens, my brother and I had addictions. At 14, I was admitted into a rehab facility. And then again, I was admitted into another rehab facility at 16. My brother was also in a few facilities himself. And we had just struggled a lot with the law growing up. We did things that we shouldn't have been doing at a very young age. So we went to jail for robbing houses, stealing cars, and we had to learn from those mistakes and pay the consequence. We've had a lot of issues with mental health. Each one of us has our own battles. I've dealt with a lot of PTSD, a lot of anxiety, depression, bipolar, things like that. I became an alcoholic, and I was drinking a lot every day for a long time. There would be brief periods where I could stop. I think the longest time that I stopped was a year, but even to this day, I struggle. So realistically, the environment that we were being raised in, even after that, was toxic. And it wasn't conducive for our mental health or our well-being. I'm not blaming that on why we did the things we did as young adults and teenagers, but it definitely had some sort of factor in it. I was in and out of mental health hospitals quite a few times. You get into this never-ending cycle where it just seems so hopeless, and you ultimately can destroy your life. Luckily, I've bounced back, but I'm still not perfect. So my past 2 relationships were good relationships, but because of my alcohol use disorder, they would always go south. It's hard to live with an alcoholic. Alcoholism has been one of the biggest downfalls of my life, if not the biggest one. So I think the turning point was really just realizing that I needed to do something with my life other than drink it away. Over the years, I just have learned that it is not good to hold on to a grudge like this for the rest of your life with hatred in your heart. It's better to learn to accept it and maybe not try to understand it, but definitely accept it and move forward. Maybe forgive if one can. I definitely think about my parents on a daily basis. Sometimes it's more of a fleeting thought, other times it's more in depth. But yeah, there's not many days that go by where I don't think about them. It is always in the back of my mind. I don't think I carry his emotional traits as much as I carry his addictive personality, but I've learned to understand that's not a way to live. And I truly just had to mature a little bit. If I had to put the blame on anybody, it would obviously be my father. He chose to murder my mother. But my half-brother Logan, he was long lost to the entire family for many years, about 18 years of my life. Nobody knew where he was. When I reconnected with him and finally met him, he knew my father more. He was around him all the time. And so him and I have had multiple discussions about who my father was, how his personality was. And I started understanding that my father wasn't as bad of a guy as the media portrayed him, as my family had portrayed him. He just had a lot of mental health issues and he had a lot of addictions. And I've been down that path. So I decided to start telling my story because I feel like it's really good to raise awareness about this type of thing, especially when it comes to domestic violence in the household, and how to just overall, I want to get the word out that even though things might seem perfect on that outside, it's not always as perfect as it seems on the inside. And another reason being is I want to put some pressure on the American justice system to really truly start to help women, take them seriously when they are asking for help. Because my mother died by my father's hands because they could not restrain him properly. In my opinion, he should have went to jail after the first violation and he should have stayed there. My mother did file a few restraints. She did all the proper things that she should have done, but the court system just did not uphold their end. They didn't do anything. They let him go time after time, and then she was murdered.